So the story of John Tanner, which is a story in this book, captured by the Indians, first-hand accounts, 1750 to 1870, edited by Frederick Drimmer. So there's this guy named John Tanner is his English name. His father was a Presbyterian minister, and then he named his son after himself, and eventually he does reinsert himself into white life, but when he was a Native American, he was called the Falcon. The Falcon, and it was like Shaw, something. And usually I try to memorize, what the Native American version is, because they didn't call him the Falcon, they actually called him Shaw, what the fuck ever. And so, John Tanner. Why I want to talk about John Tanner? Well, first of all, it's connected to Kentucky, okay? So, I don't know exactly, precisely where it was, but John Tanner, he had got beat up one day. His sisters told him, didn't get him to go to school until, afternoon, and then it was afternoon, he didn't want to go, and then he got beat up, and when he got beat up, he was like, man, I wish I got kidnapped by the Indians. I wish I lived with the Indians, because that would be so much better. And then, guess what? Indians come and kidnap him. So it talks about where he started out. It says that he was on the Kentucky River, but that doesn't make any sense at all. Because once he talks about how his father gets a new wife, because his mother dies when he's only 2 years old. So John Tanner is called the White Indian. The White Indian. So John Tanner is living with his father, and then his father gets a new wife, and then they go to move. But when they go to move, they go to the Ohio River, and then they descend down the Ohio River. And they descend down the Ohio River to where the Great Miami meets with the Ohio River. And the Great Miami, it meets on the Ohio side of the Ohio River, and it's right next to 275. And I saw absolutely nothing. I saw nothing like right on the other side where this, where John Tanner's house would have been, because right across from the Great Miami River is where he resettled. So it gives me the indication that they came down the Ohio. But the Kentucky River, it just seems like if you went, okay, let's assume it was the Kentucky River. If he was to go down the Kentucky River, then he'd had to go up the Ohio River. The Ohio River would keep on going down left, so that would be going against the current. And that doesn't, he says he descended the Ohio, so that means they would have had to have come up to the Ohio and maybe up the Licking River or some other way, not the Kentucky River. Okay, so I'm not sure about the Kentucky River, but he was very precise where he says that he had settled. So he had settled on the Kentucky side across from the mouth of the Great Miami, where it dumps into the Ohio River. And on the Ohio side, there was the Shawnee State Park, and there was the Indian Lookout. And this is in Boone County. In Boone County, there's a whole bunch of stuff. There was this Big Bone Lick, because there was a great salt lick where they found mastodon bones. And they were able to find arrowheads, but they weren't able to find a Paleo-Indian body, along with a lot of these prehistoric mastodons and mammoths and all these, that's the big bone. They found a big bone there. And they're like, what the fuck is here? And it was also where there was some French convoys. I mean, it's right there at the confluence of the Great Miami and the Ohio. So, of course, the Ohio is the biggest tributary to the Mississippi River. And then the Great Miami is a major tributary to the Ohio. So, of course, that would be, a important spot. John Tanner's family, this is when he was 9 years old. He's going to get kidnapped. He's going to get his wish. He's going to get kidnapped by the Native Americans. At 9 years old, him and his family had moved there, and they had to have 3 flatboats, and then one of the flatboats had, houses or horses and cattle, and then another flatboat had all the Negroes. So his dad's a fucking Presbyterian minister, right? Good Christian man who's got slaves. And it was, it was well known that a lot of the plantation owners would be raping their slaves. And in fact, I heard, when I read the story in Boone County, this is another thing about Boone County, Margaret Gardner in the 1850s, she tries to run away, and then right before she's captured, she starts killing her own kids because she didn't want her kids to go back into captivity, or because one of the kids was the master's was the master's kids. But they had said that it was well known that when the wife of the white man was pregnant, that he would be, fucking his slaves, because I guess she would be less prone to have sex. And so yeah. So on the other side of the Ohio, they call it the Indian Lookout in the Shawnee State Park. The Shawnee were all over Kentucky. The Cumberland River used to be called the Shawnee River. And there was also Cherokee, Yuchi. So there's a ton of Native Americans everywhere. And so that's where he was. Okay, that's where he was. While the slaves and the oldest son and John Tanner, the senior, the Presbyterian minister, was planting corn, this John Tanner, the younger, was sick. He was inside. He was supposed to stay and watch his little baby sister with the stepmother, but he wanted to go outside, so he went out to a walnut tree. And while he was at a walnut tree, Shawnee Indians take him, and they run him across the river, and then they look across the river and they can see it. So from the Great Miami, they said it was on the south side of the Great Miami River. So from the south side of the Great Miami River, when you looked across the Ohio River, you could see John Tanner's father's house. And you could see all of them, doing their thing over there. And then it goes on. The reason why the Shawnee had captured the 9-year-old was because his wife had lost a son, and she wanted to replace it because they believed in the spirit world. And so whenever one was taken, then they would capture somebody in battle, and then they would adopt them as their son. This happened with Daniel Boone. Sheltowee, the big turtle, the Shawnee blackfish, had adopted Daniel Boone. And it was, with the Iroquois Wars, the Beaver Wars, it was a common custom to, refill your ranks by adopting somebody that you had captured. And so, what's my point with all this? My point with all this has to do with the whole transgendered argument. So a transgendered person is somebody who was born one way, but identifies their sex as another. So you're born a man, you think yourself as a woman. You're born a woman, you think of yourself as a man. And so what's the problem here? So I guess the problem is we have segregated our bathrooms. And for some reason, this is in public schools, but when there was segregation when it comes to the water fountains, when there was segregation when it came to bathrooms, with black and white, there was two. And now, where are they today? Where are the public restrooms at today? Where are the public water fountains? There are no public restrooms. There are no public water fountains. I don't know where they're at. If you want to use a restroom, you got to go to a private business, McDonald's or some other things that's trying to get you in their door so you can, buy their Big Macs. But you have to walk in, use the restroom, and be like, just want to drop a load. I didn't really want to, put any more in me. And, okay, so back in the Native American days, I'm going to read this first passage here, but they had a huge tolerance. Either they were, sometimes the homosexuals or the transgendered would be treated with honor, sometimes with contempt, but they were always tolerated. Always tolerated. So, according to Havelock Ellis in his work, Sexual Inversion, among the American Indians from the Eskimo of Alaska downward to Brazil and still farther south, homosexual customs have been very frequently observed. Sometimes they are regarded by the tribe with honor, sometimes with contempt, but they always appear to be tolerated. Oliver Lafarge also discusses sexual inverts in his fine book, A Pictorial History of the American Indians, page 100. This is volume 1, page 16 in that previous book. Oliver Lafarge, he observes that at the age at which a normal youth began the full activities of man and warrior, these special individuals formerly donned women's clothing and from that time forth worked and were classed as women. The custom provided a useful place for persons who otherwise would have been hopelessly misfitted. The word berdache was used in some tribes to describe a sexual invert. Even in ancient Mexico, Bernal Diaz observed young men dressed as women and following this custom. All right, so there's John Tanner actually does talk about a woman, a man-woman, and they call him a woman. So in Native Americans, in the great savage, Shawnee, and that was another thing. When they would take prisoners, they didn't torture. They didn't torture and hurt. Well, they did torture John Tanner a bit. But a lot of the women would get captured, and they would, they tried to adopt you into the family, so they wanted you to like them. So they tried to be nice to you. I don't know. I just know that I guess there's always deprivations on both sides, but white people were scalping and murdering, and they would kill, like, pregnant. And Hiram Gregory at Yahoo Falls cut the pregnant women so that their fetuses would come out, so they were not just trying to kill the kids, but the fetuses as well. Okay, so I just want to read this short little passage, and it's about the man-woman called Yellowhead. Okay, so Yellowhead was the son of the Ojibway chief Sweet of Leech Lake. And so they used to call, this is how he describes it here. This man was one of those who make themselves women and are called women by the Indians. So it's a man who dresses like a woman, and the Native Americans call that person a woman. White people today don't even do that. This is 1789. 1789 by the Shawnee. And so Yellowhead, they called him Agakwa. That's what they would call the transgender people, Agakwas. And so Yellowhead had found out about John Tanner being adopted by the Ojibwa princess or the Shawnee, and she wanted to pursue him. And so she comes and she's like being all flirty, and John Tanner, the Falcon, he's like, I don't know whether she had seen me or only heard of me, but she let me know that she had come a long distance to see me with the hope of living with me. She often offered herself to me, not being discouraged with one refusal. She repeated her disgusting advances until I was almost driven from the lodge. Then old Netnakwa, so he was living with the Chickaway. There's Chickawee, Chickawa, okay. But, and there's only about 12 people in old Netnakwa's band. But she was well acquainted with Yellowhead's character and only laughed at the embarrassment I showed whenever she had addressed me. She seemed to encourage Yellowhead to remain at our lodge. Yellowhead was very expert in the various employments of the women and gave all her time to them. Finally, despairing of success with me or being pinched too much by hunger, which was often felt in our lodge, she disappeared. I began to hope I should not be troubled by her any more. However, after 3 or 4 days, she came back. She was loaded with dry meat. She had found the band of Chief He That Has a Bell, a relative of Netnakwa's, and he had sent an invitation for us to join him. I was glad of this invitation, and we started immediately. And the first that came, okay. So eventually, He That Has a Bell, this other tribe, who he already had 2 wives, marries Yellowhead. And so, because John Tanner would not accept Yellowhead as being, a part of the tribe, even though Yellowhead sought him out, wanted to be with him, but he was disgusted. I'm so disgusted. He That Has a Bell marries Yellowhead. So, not just tolerance, but, outright acceptance. And so he also had 2 wives. He married her. This introduction of a new inmate in his family caused some laughter and some ludicrous incidents, but it was attended with less uneasiness and quarreling than the bringing in of a new wife of the female sex. So it was like, well, you're a man dressed like a woman. All right, you're a little bit differently, but it's not the same. It kind of is, but it's not. You can only love, 1 or 2 people, so man or woman, it's like, oh, you're taking away from my love, but some reason a man-woman was more tolerated by the women than a woman who would try to take the man. But he already had 2 wives, right? And that's pretty much the end of that. So that's Yellowhead. There was Yellowhead, and the Yellowhead lived back in that day, and the Native Americans were tolerant of transgendered people. So when it comes to where they use the bathrooms at, it's kind of a stupid argument, I think. Frankly, we should have unisex bathrooms, but if we're going to have segregated bathrooms, then you should be where you identify sexually. The argument against it is that there could be creepy men, and it's the men and the women. It doesn't seem like anybody gives any concern about the boys, which is disconcerting. Why don't you give a shit about the boys? You've been having weird, creepy men go to the bathroom with your boys for quite some time. I mean, Dennis Hastert, Mark Foley, Larry Craig. Well, I don't know Larry Craig. He turned out to be, he was a gay man who was being anti-gay, but that's, it's like they try to hate. Okay, so, let's see, Mike Foley, there was that one guy, it was my 50th birthday. Of course we were wrestling and tickling each other. It was my 50th birthday. I was like, what? What did you just say? And, so that's, the transgendered people, there could be creep. So we need to watch out for that. We need to watch out for men that will pretend to be women to go into girls' restrooms, and the opposite, because I would be equally creeped out by women who want to dress like men just so they can play with the boys, right? And so, look out for that, but that's not the reason that we respect transgender people. It's just that they are men who feel effeminate and feel more womanly, and then there's women who feel more masculine, and so they, wear themselves as a man. And so it would just be weird. Like a woman who goes into a male restroom has the greater chance of being bullied, being, being bullied, being mocked, being laughed at, something bad could happen to them. So a person who's dressed like a woman goes to use the restroom in the woman's restroom, and then I think I'm with Obama on this. It makes sense. I think that to discriminate, I think what they're trying to do is transgendered have their own bathrooms, and in a way that's like your own private palace. So I think it's, I'm not against something like that as a compromise, but the idea of how are you going to police something like this? So if a person was born a woman but dresses like a man, and that means they need to go into the woman's restroom. So on the outward appearance, she looks like a man, especially she does a real good job with her, her style. So she looks like a man. She goes into the woman's restroom. The cops say, hey, what are you doing in that restroom? And then they look at their, identification that says that they're female, so they're in the right restroom, but I don't know if I believe you. So you need to go check people's genitalia. Is that how we're going to police this? That's going to increase discrimination against transgender people. Transgender people already have high rates of depression and suicide. And if we're just going to continue to tolerate fucking discrimination just because, these fucking religious quacks, which is a mental illness, racism, religion, these are mental illnesses, we're not going to learn anything, or we're going to see greater, deprivations against the transgendered community. And we should be like the Shawnee. We should be, he who has a bell. He who has a bell had 2 wives. And I think as adults, we're allowed to do what we want. So I'm in favor of polygamy, like the Mormons, like Mitt Romney's religion out in Utah. But I'm also, he who has a bell married Yellowhead. So Yellowhead wasn't just tolerated, wasn't just, wasn't discriminated against or treated badly. John Tanner acted like he was really disgusted by it. But, he who has a bell married Yellowhead. So, that was outwardly accepted. The Shawnee Native Americans outwardly accepted wholeheartedly transgender people. And if the Native Americans could do it, who have been on this earth for 10 to 14,000 years before white people, we've only been here. Kentucky was settled 1776. There's about 200 people in Kentucky. So 200 years. We've been here for 200 years. And Native Americans have been here for 10,000, 14,000 years. And they accepted transgendered. In fact, I heard this was an old Native American, I don't know which tribe, but they believe that we all have the female spirit and the male spirit within us. So that's more tolerant and more accepted. And these are the savages. These are the uncivilized people. These are the ones that need our Christianity to civilize them and make them, act right. No, that's such horseshit. This is insanity. We should be more like the Shawnee. And that's it, okay? So y'all quit being fucking discriminating bastards and learn to love one another, right? And that Jesus, and then what he said, he would hang out with the muck. He would hang out with the persecuted, right? The poor, the prostitutes, lepers, tax collectors, anybody that was hated. Jesus was their friend. So, are you really being like Jesus? Or are you hiding behind the cloak of Jesus to do some bad shit? Because that's what religion does. There's always going to be evil. There's always going to be good. But religion makes it to where the person can do evil in the name of good. It's mental health, mental illness. So, John Masters, y'all learn to love each other out there. Peace.